Over the last century, America has grown and prospered to a level unparalleled in history, while poor, working class, and indigenous people continue to suffer like never before. Now, in the midst of an unprecedented housing crisis, homeowners and tenants, the employed and unemployed, people displaced by social and natural disasters are speaking out. We understand now more than ever that our challenges are not just rural or urban, not just poor or middle class. We realize that the crisis we face is not just a housing crisis, but a human rights crisis. It was exactly that assertion that brought Raquel Rolnick, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, to the United States in the fall of 2009. While the UN reports on human rights in countries around the world, this was the first official visit of a special rapporteur to examine the status of housing rights in the United States. Ms. Rolnick embarked on a tour to meet with government officials and grassroots community organizations across the country. In order to capture this historic journey, we mobilized a national network of community leaders and residents, videographers and photographers to tell our story.
Empty buildings are a crime. Landlords need to do some time. Thank you and good evening, New York City. This is a historic evening in New York City. Never before has there been an official visit by a UN Special Rapporteur on adequate housing. It is an opportunity for us as citizens to put the United States on trial in the International Court of Judgment and Moral Obligation.
She reports directly to the United Nations General Assembly, so she's the top dog on housing issues around the world. This is her first stop in a 7-city tour. She'll be in New York City, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which is a rural area. She'll also be in Chicago, New Orleans, Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, Los Angeles, and then Washington, D.C. And the reason why we arranged the tour the way we did is that at first it was all urban centers like New York, like Chicago, which was good, but we said, Raquel, we need to build a movement in this country because for too long you've had those at the very top and all the rest of us. And the way things are going now, it's impacting all of us, white, black, all of us.
Human rights is not something that once is written is okay. On the contrary, it's a constant fight. And the implementation of human rights should be real practices. So I see this mission as an opportunity to open a dialogue, to open a movement towards the achievement and the implementation, the right to adequate housing. And of course, it's important, the content of the report, to really reflect what is going on. But I think more important than that is what's going on here.
My name is Joan Harrison. Up until 7 weeks ago, I was street homeless. I'm now living in a room. I don't know how long that's going to last.
Two things I would like for you to take to Washington to HUD. We need to address this title of affordable living or affordable housing. What is affordable and affordable to whom? My name is Pat Jacobs, Central Harlem, and yes, I'm a working poor person.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gloria Swanson, and I live in a complex, 7 buildings, with a predatory landlord. When he acquired my building, it was under the premise that he was going to evict 1/3 of the tenants.
He has used every low, dirty trick, including feces and urine, to come down in my apartment. I'm sick, I lay down and I get up and I continue to fight. And I fight and I fight and I fight.
In New York City, affordable housing stock is rapidly disappearing. At the height of the housing boom, Deregulation and bank lending practices allowed real estate speculators to take out over-leveraged loans to buy the city's low-rent buildings. These speculators had goals of aggressively driving out low-income tenants so they could raise rents and make more profit. They used tactics like harassment, cutting services, and evictions. The Special Rapporteur got a chance to witness firsthand these human rights violations.
I gotta be like that for lighting. I have a disgusting kitchen, leaking, cucarachas everywhere.
Este building nunca ha sido, le han dado importancia.
One time we couldn't take a bath for more than a month because the stuff was dripping down, completely dripping down, okay?
See the floor here? This whole floor is rotten.
They found 34 violations in this apartment alone. During the course of the day also, the lights go off, just because I have the electric outages, the boxes in the hallway there. And then they start to spark, and that was like the first major violation that the inspectors found that can cause fires.
We don't have fire hoses. Every floor, 17 stories. You see a fire hose here?
Right.
There's no fire hose. If we have sprinklers, I don't know where they're located.
Like tenants in New York City, homeowners in rural Pennsylvania are facing housing insecurity. Debbie Amorosa lives with her family in a home her father built in the 1970s.
It's not just the house. This house is in my heart because anywhere I look, I see my dad. I just love this house. It's got a part of me in it, and it's in me.
When Debbie's husband Fred had a heart attack and lost his job, they became one of thousands of Northeast Pennsylvania families facing foreclosure. Tom Foley runs a hotline to help people like Debbie who are facing foreclosure.
A lot of the foreclosure calls that we get here are more due to people who have lost their jobs or have had a change in their employment status of some type that has affected how they can pay their mortgage or can't pay their mortgages.
For communities like Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, decades of deindustrialization have dramatically decreased the number of living wage jobs.
Coal was a viable industry up through around the 1950s. And between 1970 and 1975, there was a pretty sustainable transition of the workforce from coal and textile into industry. And there was a pretty sustained and viable middle class. Like, everybody was able to work, everybody was able to have a home, basically. When the decline started to happen, Wilkes-Barre and everybody else just decided, if we build, they will come. They wanted to bring in office work and young professionals and things like that. But they built it, and it still hasn't come.
In 2007, Frank Sindico founded the Northeastern Pennsylvania Organizing Center to address the mounting human rights crisis in his community.
This is an extraordinary opportunity for us to look into the manifestations of the housing crisis locally and think about what we can do collectively and reach out and connect to the voices of those that are most affected by this housing crisis. And they are people who are living in public housing and people that are dealing with foreclosure and the homeless. But in my estimation, it's almost everybody. Everybody in this room knows somebody who is dealing with one of these issues of housing. My family's dealt with foreclosure. I know the pain that it causes. I know how your life is thrown into complete upheaval, and the stress and the unsettled aspects of it are enough to destroy a person.
You know, there's no more people we can borrow from. We can't get help from the banks. We can't get help anywhere. But these banks, these mortgage companies, I called them desperate, crying. I said, I've asked you if I can make partial payments. She told me no. I've asked you if I can pay the interest payment. She told me no. I So we asked you to refinance for 30 years, 25 years to make our payments lower. You said no. I said, everything we've tried to do with you people, you've told us no. And I said, but yeah, you say, oh, we don't want your home. Well, work with us. We're willing to work, but you don't want to do anything. Then we have to decide what we're going to do. Either let them take the house, or we're going to have to, I guess, sell the house. And if we have to sell the house, then I have to say goodbye to a piece of me. And that's where we stand.
People are not losing their houses here in Wilkes-Barre or in my hometown or whatever because there's a lack of houses. There's plenty of houses. In fact, there's more houses than there are homeless people.
The lack of living wage jobs has created a new wave of homelessness extending from rural to urban populations. In Chicago, Ms. Rolnick began her visit by hearing testimonies from a group of newly homeless adults.
See, this is my first time ever being homeless. I always had a place up to 21 years, and I had a job too. I lost the job, and all of a sudden, I'm over here. Now, I slept out there in the park and all of that.
I have a good education. I come from a fairly wealthy family. I've worked my whole life. When I became homeless, I didn't know what to do. You know, I'm a pretty smart guy. I had no clue. I was scared to death.
Massive displacement and homelessness hit Chicago in 1999 when the city began eliminating its high-rise public housing complexes. 51 high-rise buildings have been demolished over the last 10 years, eliminating 13,000 permanently affordable apartments. J.R. Fleming has been organizing for economic and social rights for almost a decade.
How is it that in one of the most affluent nations in the world, we don't have a system that can absorb, protect, or catch those who fall through the crack? What type of future are we leaving our children?
On my back, I carry such a heavy bag. My few belongings in it as nomad as I. I'm so tired of my transient life. I'm not like the rest of you. I do not know where I'll sleep tonight. All I know is I pray it doesn't rain. Well, the sun is going down. Where will it be? An abandoned house with shattered windows? An airport lobby, a park? Maybe just a small wooded area behind a store. All I know is this is not the life I signed up for. I want to be normal. I'm not a runaway. I'm a throwaway.
I think this is the most important thing. Don't be invisible. Don't hide yourselves. Don't think you don't deserve. Don't think this is an individual problem for anybody, a family issue or individual. This is social. This is overall. This is economic. That's nobody's fault that you are on the street. It's the fault and the failure is of our system, because our system needs to provide every human being, despite age, sex orientation, race, any income, anything, a decent standard of living.
Public housing was originally envisioned as a major social safety net to prevent homelessness. Much of public housing was built in the 1950s and 60s when the federal government began acting to ensure that every American could access their right to a decent home.
There's no public housing system left in America. Our country has demolished the very remedy to our housing crisis. Public housing once operated as the stepping stone, the first step for people to access housing if they were homeless, without an income, of low income, or struggling working people. That is no longer.
Across the country, public housing is being dismantled and starved for resources just when it is needed most. In 1978, the Housing and Urban Development budget was $80 billion. 30 years later, at $35.2 billion, HUD's budget has been slashed by more than half.
Human beings, you know, You know, our human rights has been violated in this community time after time. You got enough units down in the city, why not start building? You know, we had some vacant land, and we said start building, and then as you build, move the tenants into the new units. But CHA's thinking was that tear down everything.
In the aftermath of one of the biggest natural disasters in our nation's history, HUD encouraged the city of New Orleans to demolish most of its still livable public housing. Hurricanes Katrina and Rita displaced over 2 million people in the Gulf Coast region. After the storms, city policies encouraged market-rate development over affordable housing, preventing the return of 1/4 of the city's population. Homelessness is now at an estimated 12,000 people, double the number before the storms, and with rents 81% higher, an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 individuals are squatting in abandoned residential and commercial buildings.
For many of us, especially those of us who have less than others, there was a second storm. We call this the dry storm. We lost our communities and neighbors who was just as close as family, not due to the storm, but to the government policy.
Let us see now! Housing now! Let us see now!
On December 20th, 2007, the New Orleans City Council voted to demolish the city's biggest public housing complexes. The city replaced 4,500 units with new mixed-income developments. It cost the government $400,000 to build each new unit, while it would have only cost $10,000 to repair each old unit. In St. Bernard Public Housing Complex, 1,000 families were displaced.
They didn't want any more poor working class people in here. Mm-hmm. You know, what they were trying to make is out of community where they said they wasn't making enough money off of us.
But also one of the reasons why they said they had to demolish St. Bernard is because they said that it was in such bad condition after the storm. That was the reason they gave, but in fact it was so sturdy that Sharon actually came back into her apartment after the storm and cleaned it up. They said, look, I can come back. And they made her get out. They said, we're still going to demolish.
In the absence of public housing, low-income families in New Orleans must rely on other federally funded affordable housing programs like Section 8 housing choice vouchers. A Section 8 voucher is essentially a paper certificate that says the federal government will subsidize the rent of a very low-income person on the private market. A family who receives Section 8 must find a suitable apartment during a short window of opportunity or lose the voucher and the hope of obtaining affordable housing.
Between September 9th and September 18th of this year, the Housing Authority opened its Section 8 voucher waiting list. Almost 37,000 families applied. And this is in a city with a reduced population, and it's, you know, almost twice as many families that applied back in 2001. Yeah. So to me, that says volumes about what the need is. But now, if you can believe it, there is actually some real discussion at the local level about whether we're getting too much affordable housing rebuilt, which to me is just an absurd discussion. It doesn't match with my reality or my client's reality. And I think there's pretty much no question that we're not getting enough deeply affordable housing.
With the dismantling of public housing in cities like New Orleans and Chicago, government officials have broken a promise to house America's poor and those in need. However, no community Ms. Rowling visited has suffered more from the broken promises of the U.S. government than Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Home to the Oglala Lakota Sioux, Pine Ridge consists of two of the poorest counties in the United States. 80% of its residents are unemployed. Bill Means was the location chair for the Special Rapporteur's visit.
On behalf of International Indian Treaty Council,
We say welcome to all of you. Welcome to our visitors. Today is a good day.
I would like to thank you, and thank you again and again and again. First, of inviting me to come here, to have the privilege and the honor to come and listen to you.
So that we can study the conditions in one of the richest countries of all the world. Because everybody knows there's still poor people in the United States, whether it's New Orleans, Chicago, or Pine Ridge Reservation. We have a certain unique legal and political relationship because of treaties, because our people resisted, because our people fought for this land.
The Lakota Nation, like other Indian nations, is party to treaties with the United States, signed in the 1800s. Among the United States treaty obligations is the provision of subsistence, including housing. Yet the United States has failed to live up to these treaty commitments. This has led to the dire housing situation that Pine Ridge residents describe for the Special Rapporteur.
There are people out there with no electricity, no running water. Their houses are run down, but because we're proud people, we will still live there. We will make the best of it.
I guess ever since our people had to give up the teepee, the housing became an issue and a problem for us. It's not enough, never enough housing for our people.
You know, you got 2-3 families living in one home. How do you think they feel? A lot of our kids sleep in school.
Homes on the reservation are notoriously overcrowded and scarce. An average of 17 people live in 2 to 3 bedroom homes. 60% of the houses in the reservation are substandard and infested with potentially fatal black mold. The average life expectancy for individuals living in Pine Ridge is 48 to 52 years old.
As their council representative, I feel very frustrated because these are human beings living out there, you know, in this real bad living condition.
But even though we live under these conditions, we can't sell our culture. We can't sell our homeland.
Housing is not just a roof. It's not just walls. It's much more than that. And I know that housing has a sacred meaning attached to it. Territories are sacred. They are not only material. They are spiritual as well. So housing must have a community attached to it. And a community and a territory. A territory where people can have access to the means of livelihood and not only being sheltered somewhere.
Roughly 50,000 people sleep on the streets of Los Angeles. On any given night, shelters are completely full. Yet in 2006, the city spent more money towards law enforcement to police the homeless than it did to assist the homeless, particularly on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. LA Can, an organization founded and led by homeless and extremely low-income Skid Row residents, hosted the Special Rapporteur on her visit to LA.
Homelessness is at an all-time high. Barriers is at an all-time high. And we are trying to advocate for more housing and more resources to eradicate homelessness in our downtown community.
In the past decade, more than 13,000 rent control units were lost to conversion, demolition, or other removal. Every day, more and more families are facing homelessness.
Lamentablemente, casi estoy a punto de volverme un desamparado, un homeless, porque desgraciadamente tuve la mala suerte que me jubilé hace un tiempo y ahora el cheque ya no me alcanza nomás para la renta.
I was nearly homeless, and I heard that a deal had been made between a developer and the County of Los Angeles to put in 10 units of affordable senior housing. Well, I wanted that senior housing, and I wanted it badly because I didn't want to live in my little old wrecked up car.
The City of Los Angeles has heavily subsidized the development of luxury housing at the expense of affordable housing.
2 years ago, the City of LA had a goal of building over 14,000 units of housing. Guess for what income bracket? $130,000 a year, and you see them to your left.
Just like in New York City, LA's real estate speculators are buying buildings to sell for a quick profit, aggressively kicking out low-income tenants in the process.
And so everything now is being ratcheted to make sure you get out, because it's a lot easier to sell an empty building to another investor than it is a full building, because then they have to take over the rent control tenants, and that's what nobody wants.
I really heard here many stories and testimonies on precariousness and housing rights violations in a country that is one of the richest and wealthiest countries of the world, which has been a model of economic social organization and had exported this model for the world. So it's very important to show who is in and who is out of this model.
The Special Rapporteur concluded her U.S. tour in Washington, D.C.
The wrecking ball has come to Washington, D.C. Underrepresented are the homeless, disregarded and disenfranchised.
Change is possible when more and more people are committed to change. What I can do, and then what UN can do, I can echo your voices. But in order to echo your voices in a loud way, I need your voices. So it's very important that you stand up, that you stay up, and you keep on shooting, so we can also echo your voices, and perhaps by doing that we can help you.
gotta take it. We gotta take it. We gotta take it.
Making sure that a human right is actually realized, not at a theoretical sense, but in a community sense also.
This is how we're going to connect the fight for foreclosure, the fight for public housing, the fight to end homelessness. We're going to bring all them fights together and combine them on our human rights framework, because together we'll be able to move the agenda for people.
Need a social movement, a broad-based social movement that is multiracial, multi-community, that's really national in scope, that forces our government to really not just change its national housing policy, but really change all of the policies impacting our social issues and human rights, including education, healthcare, work with dignity.
It's not just about the right to housing, it's about the right to healthcare, it's about the right to education, decent food, decent communities, work. I mean, this is a bigger struggle than housing as far as I'm concerned. And, this relationship and this kind of national thing, and I'm hoping that we can think about that kind of long-term thing.
And I know it's not going to be over. The change is not going to happen overnight. But we have to start working to meet our goal.
Allowing our membership to hear the struggles of other communities, it allows us to know that we're not by ourselves.
We all start supporting each other, standing behind each other. It'll make all the difference in the world.
There is a house built out of stone, wooden floors, walls, and window sills, tables and chairs worn by all of the dust. This is a place where I don't feel this is a place where I feel at home. color of green. Ground had a rose and past its knees. By the cracks of his skin I climbed to the top. I climbed the tree to see the world. When the gods came around to blow me down, held on as tightly as you held on me.